so bear with me. Okay. So the next purpose of a FemK is just to argue about like the sexism that is in the topic or the plan or the rhetoric that your opponents are using. So an example of that would be like a Yemen AF last year or something that was talking about like specifically only men that were harmed, or the death penalty only in relation to men, or if your opponents were to say you guys or say something in cross-sex that is problematic, like that is sexist, it's like to critique that, keyword critique, to critique like the sexism in that. So those are some of the that's like the main purposes, just to speak out against injustice, like inequality everywhere, talk about the sexism in the debate space, and then talk about sexism in like the rhetoric or topic that the AF or maybe the neg, probably not the neg, that's using. So next we're going to talk about Femme Killjoy and just what it is, all of that. So first off, the author that most people are referring to when they talk about Killjoy is Sarah Ahmed. She's from Australia. She has a bunch of good, I don't think she has TED Talks. She has a bunch of good lectures on YouTube. If you just type in Sarah Ahmed Killjoy, I've been watching a bunch of them recently because I'm probably going to read Killjoy at some point. But anyway, so there's like, just for reference, there's a UC Santa Barbara lecture she gave that's really good if you want to learn more. And then in her book, which is, hold on, I have it. Can you see my screen now? Hold on. This is the book right here because I was literally just reading it. Living a Feminist Life by Sarah Ahmed. That's the book. And yeah. Okay. Can y'all see my screen now? It might be messed up. Can everyone see it?
Okay. It's on like the PowerPoint slide. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I see that.
Thank you. So yeah, in her book, she discusses how women are forced to conform to certain standards society sets for them, like crossing their legs, smiling constantly, wearing a bra, that type of stuff. And so she talks about, like, first off, just like the things like society does to force women to do things. And then Ahmed says that in order to break away from this, women need to kill the joy. And what this means is to bring up uncomfortable or unhappy subjects, which is basically feminism is like an uncomfortable subject for men, and refuse the happiness society tries to impose upon women. This allows women to disrupt the fantasy that is happiness created by the patriarchy. And so more Killjoy stuff talks about how, like, we all have this fake sense of happiness. There is no real happiness because of the patriarchy. And yeah, like, men can be happy, but women are never going to be happy because of the patriarchy. And that's why, like, women need to refuse the happiness and kill the joy is the key point. So the AF is an example of killing the joy in real life because it disrupts the false notion that debate is liberal and inclusive sphere, and by exposing its patriarchal roots and conduct. So what this is saying is that a lot of people think about the debate space as like a very liberal, inclusive place because it's very diverse or whatever their argument is. But obviously it's not, because the patriarchy is still going on and other forms of discrimination. And so this is like killing the joy in the debate space because there is no like joy in the first place. And then these asks often include personal narratives or some sort of performative aspect. So what I mean by that is sometimes they'll like read a poem at the beginning of the AF, or a lot of times in Killjoy, they'll like say their experiences with sexism specifically in the debate space. So there's one that I've seen, and it's like she talks about how a judge at the end of a round said that he voted her down because she had a hole in her tights, and like that's like she like that is unclassy and like all of this stuff. And then also like men talking over you in debate rounds, blah blah blah. So a lot of like personal narratives in the debate space, but also if you have personal narratives in other ways, or just if you look at politics and the women in politics, you can see that there's a patriarchy, whatever. So yeah, though that's like the app usually has some type of performative aspect to it. It doesn't necessarily have to, but it usually does. And then a negative argument, if you were reading this on the negative, it doesn't usually have any type of performative aspect. And then the links, because if you're reading this, you need to have some type of link to like the topic in some way. So policy making is the first really big one, which I think that just kind of answers everything, because policy making, women don't have a seat at the table, and women aren't like getting to make the policy, and so obviously that is sexism. And then same thing with international relations. It's actually getting a lot better, but it's not good enough. So like women in international relations, blah blah blah. And then restricting language. So what that means is like restricting language is like telling women what they can and cannot say, like that puts them in like a mold, if that makes sense. Like it's unfeminine to say this, like if you're cussing a lot, that's like unfeminine, that's disrespectful. But like a man can say the F word all the time and it's not like thought of that. So that's some way. And then debaters can also critique the language. Assumptions of the 1AC is that they defend or assume neutral debate sphere where debaters can present objective facts in the way traditional policy apps do. So what this is talking about is how they critique the language of the 1AC, because the 1AC is assuming that the debate space is good and the debate space isn't like discriminatory. And so they're also critiquing that. But a lot of the main links is just like policy in general, like the idea of reading a policy app, the policy in itself, like how it's going to get passed, is very sexist. So and so in order to like stop all that, you have to kill the joy. And so next we're going to look at some alternatives. And the way that I like to look at alternatives for K's is more of just a like as a kind of solvency, or like what is the impact going to be, like what does the K do. I think of it as kind of like an impact. And so I have a couple, I believe, I have a couple alternatives to show y'all. So this one is, the alternative is a refusal to smile. It's a rejection of the way society wants women to act and forces institutional change. And so this is like my natural resting expression is one that reads to others as bitchy or mean or angry. Strangers have told me to smile, cheer up, or simply not to look the way they do. I feel like if you are a woman, you have been told to. I was somewhere recently where they were like, this man was like, smile, and I'm like, what? Anyway, so that happens a lot, and so I really like this alternative, and I think it's like fun. So I've had an inverse response to automatic smile. I've given the happiness seeking stranger the finger. I've given people the finger or imagine doing so because there's something incredibly condescending about telling a woman to smile. There exists in much of the Western world a long and entrenched history of telling women how to think, feel, and act. I had to train myself out of the phony smile, which is a nervous tick on every teenage girl, and this meant that I smiled rarely in truth when it came down to real smiling. Women's liberation movement, a smile boycott at which a declaration all women would instantly abandon their pleasing smiles, henceforth smiling only when something pleased them. And so this is inevitably like killing the joy, and it's like the impact to that. And then the next alternative is exposing happiness. The alternative is to expose the fantasy of happiness and challenge the oppressive structures that rely on it. And so this is Ahmed, which is the girl that wrote it. Guys, Karina, if you're listening, Barnard.
Yes.
Oh, that's all I'm trying to say. Okay. So then it goes on to say, basically, here, we'll read somewhere. The feminist killjoy makes sense if we place her in the context of feminist critiques or happiness, of how happiness is just to justify social norms as social goods. And so basically what that means is like, you're trying to just fit with like all the men. Not to agree to stay in the place of wish might be a refuse that the happiness that is wished for. To be involved in political activism is thus be involved in the struggle against happiness. Even if we are struggling for different things, we might share. So this is really good. Okay, hold on, keep going. So this is, you can answer like if they ran black killjoy, anti-blackness, you could try to turn this. So our activist archives are thus unhappy archives, feminist critiques of the figure of the happy housewife, Black critiques of the myth of the happy slave, queer critiques of sentimentalism of heterosexuality as domestic bliss. The struggle over happiness provides the horizon in which political claims are made to be willing to go against social order. So basically what this card is good to do, so first of all, it's a good alternative, but also it helps show that like the idea of killjoy and like the idea of happiness is also in other people, is also for other people that are discriminated against, like queer people and like Black people. And so this is a really good way to I think if you go in the book, if you like keep reading more, it has better answers to like a queer K or a like anti-Blackness K. So yeah, I think this all makes sense. I think is there another alt? Oh, this is framework. Okay, does anybody have questions about the alternatives that I've talked about so far? Nope. Okay. And so next we're going to look at the framework. So Feminist Killjoy is a tool to force an examination of real unhappiness hidden under society-imposed joy. Disruption and rethinking of the definition of happiness are the only way to solve. And so I think this, I can't like highlight it, but so the rethinking of the definition of happiness are the only way to solve. That is really, really strong because the idea of happiness, like right here, it talks about hetero happiness. There's also like the other, like before that, I was talking about like the happy slave and things like that. So the idea of the definition of like everyone's happy, we're all doing great, is simply not true. And so this not only helps like feminism killjoy, but also like queer killjoy and Black killjoy. So I think this is a really good card to frame the debate through. Yeah. So is there any questions on killjoy before we talk about international relations?
Does this beat queer K? Like, does it outweigh queer K?
It depends who's debating and what their arguments are. Like if Trey was debating me, for example, I would argue that there's also like you have to kill the joy in the queer space. So we solve for his K, but then he could also argue like the literature you're reading in itself doesn't include queer bodies, and so it would become an argument. It would depend how the debate plays out, but also what I don't know, I forgot what the like queer framing is. So it would also be like a framing debate of because like my framing is saying that we need to rethink the definition of happiness for all people, and then he would be like, well, they're literally not talking about queer people, like a couple words about queer people doesn't solve. So that's a good question, Ishan. It just kind of depends who's debating, but I would not read Femme Killjoy against anti-Blackness because you're probably gonna lose unless you have like unless most of your cards are about Black Femme Killjoy. It probably isn't the move, but yeah.
Okay.
For the smiling alternative, like to smile, if I smile in a round, is that gonna mess up my whole argument?
That's what I was thinking. I was like, Karina literally smiles so much.
Yeah, it's fine. The feminist pain. No, I'm joking. But yeah, is that actually gonna be?
Yeah, I would try to not smile in round.
Okay. All right.
They probably would say something if you're like, they'd probably be like, bro, this girl's literally smiling.
And then also, I would just like to share, when we were at Glenbrooks last year, our entire, like, me and Ellie and, like, all our, or two other people from our school were like, oh my gosh, guys, we can't say you guys. And so in a round, it was like, hey, you all. And we were, like, so stressed about that because we're so used to saying you guys. I don't know. It was pretty funny. So no one would run this against us. We just, yeah. That's all.
Karina, do you remember when, I forgot his name, but that one coach, that like old dude who like wrote on the ballot about your outfit?
Oh my God, yeah. He was like,
that's what I was thinking about.
Yeah, except to be fair, he told the other guy he needed to tie his tie better, so I guess.
Yeah, so maybe he's just weird.
It's okay, I just weird.
Okay. Great questions, everyone. So next we're going to talk about FemIR, which is Femme International Relations. And I also think this is really fun. So Femme International Relations is a huge category of literature that centers on the ways females relate to the political realm and how they are frequently excluded from political decision-making, which reproduces the violence that like women go through all the time. Feminist IR scholars mainly critique status quo depictions of war and security within traditional IR. So honestly, I think this topic was better. FemIR linked a lot better with arms sales, but I think it can also link to CJR. For example, when discussing war, people in IR will only refer to the actual people fighting, which are soldiers, and not the women that are like at home and getting bombed and getting raped and getting murdered. And so that perspective marginalizes how war affects people who aren't fighting, but are instead staying at home and taking care of the children. Feminists argue those who are mostly wives of soldiers, like no one is talking about that. And also like the PTSD that comes with that. And then like also, for example, like Trey and I last year read a drones app, and like women are like one of the main targets of drones and like airstrikes because they're in their homes and stuff. And so like no one ever talks about that. So that's like basically the idea of it, is just like critiquing how the plan or the AF or just like any card that talks about policy really isn't including women. And then this can also be run on the AF, like as a FemK, like FemIRK. I haven't seen many of them. I don't know if I'd recommend that. I think it works better on the neg, but yeah. Okay, so then I have some cards. These cards looking kind of whack, but I just want to read these cards a little bit. So, vote negative to recast international relations with the feminist lens. The alternative is to engage in a widespread recognition of women and gender within IR. This includes shifting from the discipline of masculine IR to the inclusive studies of eliminating binders of class, race, culture, and gender, using the obscured experiences of excluded women. Only then can we address the issues within international relations. So basically, oh look, Wellesley, another women's college. That's what I like to see. Anyway, so this is basically just saying like we have to look at women in IR, and that's the alternative really. It's just like see what they're going through, see their perspectives. So yeah, I think I mean I could read through this. Okay, it's talking about the League of Nations and how I don't know who that is, experienced a lot of discrimination in the League of Nations, which I mean honestly, like that makes sense. Yeah, I feel like the rest of the card it makes sense. Does anybody here? If anybody has questions, let me know. So there's gender bias specific to international relations. Yeah. Okay. Here, I'll let you all ask questions after I read this one if you have any. Embracing a gendered perspective is the only way to subvert dominant power structures. And so basically what this is saying is like the power structure of I'm trying to move this. Okay, there we go. The power structures of like women in IR not having like any power, autonomy, whatever. Like we have to embrace the idea of women's perspectives in international relations, and also like the impact that international relations has on women. So like for example, the like drone strikes or like war and all of that. So like basically if you read any card that is in relation to international relations, it probably doesn't say anything about like the women or like how the women are, like what is happening, like what is going on with the women. And so that is the problem. And then its essential focus, interstate diplomacy and war, both on the face of it, near exclusivity, masculine affairs. Yeah, so basically this is just talking about like IR had neglected studies and norms, ideas, and processes such as structural violence, including poverty, environmental injustice, and socio-political inequality. The many scholars argue are the root cause of international conflict and insecurity. And then it goes on to say some feminists, given the distance from dominant, I skipped that, but argue that women's lives on the margins of world politics afford us a less biased and more realistic understanding of international relations, which is obviously true. Feminist scholars use gender analysis to deconstruct the theoretical framework of international relations and reveal the masculine bias pervading key concepts such as power, security, sovereignty. And basically, like, the idea of it is just it's a male-dominated sphere, so we have to embrace the gendered perspective. I think that is all. Yeah, so here I will